You're listening to Search the Scriptures Daily, a program in which we encourage everyone who desires to know God's truth to look to God's Word for all that is essential for salvation and living one's life in a way that is pleasing to Him. We're discussing psychology in the church, which has been the topic for a series of programs we've been doing on psychological counseling and how it's made major inroads within evangelical Christianity. And our discussion is based in part upon the content presented in the DVD we produced by the same title, Psychology and the Church, Critical Questions, Crucial Answers. Now, Dave, we quoted a number of research psychiatrists and psychologists who scrutinize the methods and claims of the practitioners of psychotherapy and determine how effective they are. And we've learned...
And, Tom, they are among them.
Right.
They're checking themselves out.
Exactly.
And they've become disillusioned.
Well, one of these research psychiatrists, and I'm going to quote him, he says that the techniques used by Western psychiatrists are, with few exceptions, on exactly the same plane as these techniques used by witch doctors. Now, that's a quote from research psychiatrist E. Fuller Torrey, who is just being factual. Now, I have here a very heavy book for our listening audience. This is probably a 5-6 pounder. Okay, it's a very large textbook. Well, it's not a textbook, but it's the title of the book is The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's really the Bible of psychotherapy. That's
issue 4, or the 4th edition.
This is the latest edition, edition 4. Now, Dave, this is a very thick...
And it's the latest edition, edition 4, and it's also been revised
right.
a couple of times.
But it's, as you can see, it's a very thick, very impressive book for a field that a research psychiatrist just likened unto shamanism.
And they're aiming at 2011 DSM-5.
Right. So how can you have a book like this that's based on really something that's not scientific?
Tom, I was, the Lord sits me next to interesting people on airplanes, and I was sitting next to she wasn't a psychiatrist, psychologist, and she had just come from the latest convention, and she was just mumbling in anger because now she says I got to buy another one.
Another DSM.
Right. And she says, this isn't scientific. They vote on this.
Well, let's get into it a little bit, Dave. I've got some interesting information about the DSM.
Tom, can I go back before the DSM for a moment?
Sure. Because I'm going to start in 1952. You're going to go back earlier than that?
I'll go back earlier than that.
Okay.
I don't know whether everybody out there has heard this. I think I've mentioned it a time or two, or maybe put it in the Berean call. But there was a very serious psychiatric disorder that was cured by the Civil War. It was called drapetomania, and it was rampant in those days. It affected only one class of people, slaves. And the symptoms, I'm being serious now, the symptoms of this psychiatric disorder, mental aberration, this mental disorder, were an overwhelming urge to escape the plantation. And what do you know, the Civil War cured that one.
Dave, we laugh, but, this psychologist, clinical psychologist that you sat next to, this is such a system that if, and I make no apologies for this, it's almost fraudulent.
It is.
Really. Well, let's start with this.
But Tom, when I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but you got the book and you got all the facts over there. You remember 1974, the annual meeting there in San Francisco.
David,
did we mention that already?
We've mentioned it, but let's use that as a punchline here. Let's start in 1952. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Because people are not going to believe it. If we jump out with it, well, let's build up to it. That's what I'm getting at. 1952, the American Psychiatric Association, again, produced this book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and more commonly called the DSM. The first edition listed 107 mental disorders. Remember, this is the Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right.
That's 1952.
That's quite a few.
Right. The list of
Tom, I keep interrupting, but when I remember, we used to go to the insane asylum. It was called Patton. I remember the name of it. And we would go there to give out tracts. And in those days, you just had one diagnosis. You were crazy, or you weren't.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Let me say this for our listeners. I mean, look, we're not trying to mock this, and certainly
It's hard not to, Tom.
I know it is, but at the same time, we know people go through issues of life, depression and so on and so forth. Dave, maybe for some of our listeners, they don't know. I'm particularly compassionate with regard to people who were diagnosed with mental illnesses because my father was a psychiatrist. I grew up in the psychiatric community. I mean, I've lived with these people. So it's not that we're not empathetic here, but there's something beyond this that just makes you angry almost. Well, I know it makes you angry.
Right.
But, 1968. From 1952 to 1968, the mental disorders grew to 182, to 265 in 1980, to 292 in 1987, and today's count, based on this DSM-4, 374 mental disorders. Now, let's pick a few here, okay?
Well, Tom, have we been getting crazier? Or did we have a lot of people who weren't really that bad off, running around and everybody thought they were normal? Or is it that only these guys can decide who is normal and who isn't?
Well, you know what we hear? We hear, well, wait a minute, Dave, life's becoming more complex. I mean, back in 1952, things were kind of dull and boring, right? And
Tom, why don't you explain why they have this? Because you don't get insurance coverage unless you're in there.
I think they're going to see that by some of the 374 items, the mental disorders that are placed in
and
here.
Expanding the number expands the influence of psychiatrists over the society.
I think people are going to come to that conclusion, Dave. First of all, let's start with oppositional defiant disorder.
That's ODD. It's very odd.
Well, let's see here. It pertains to a child or adult who demonstrates, and I'm quoting from the book, hostile behavior toward authority figures. The symptoms include losing one's temper, arguing with adults, deliberately doing things that will annoy other people, and blaming others for his or her own mistakes or misbehavior. Whoa. I mean, come on, Dave. You had 4 kids. I have 5 kids. Any of them demonstrate any of these along the line?
Well, of course. Some of them, sometimes.
Well, or in the workplace. Would you have any people like that?
It's just actually pretty normal, abnormal behavior that you see it all the time, but we never called it a mental disorder. We just call it, actually what it is the flesh, the Bible calls it, selfishness.
So what you're saying, Dave, is ODD would open the door, what you said earlier, to lots of people needing this kind of help.
Yeah, I don't know if you have the quote there, but who was it that said, You have the right to be a really obnoxious person on the job. If you're not that bad, you don't get any rights. But if you're really outrageous, then your rights kick in, and they have special privileges for you, and your employer has to make special provision.
Dave, and as you know, past programs, you've written.
For more information about the Berean call us toll-free at our order number or visit our website